I'll go ahead and get us started for those of us who are here, and we may have some folks joining us a little later on in the discussion. But for the moment, we can go ahead and issue our standard disclaimer.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
Okay, got our standard disclaimer out of the way there. So welcome everybody to your talking circle today. Here is our agenda for what we have covered for today. So we first at the top of the session, we've carved out some time to respond to your input that you've shared with us in previous sessions about the desire to talk about what you're doing in your program areas around professional development, and knowing, and also last week, or excuse me, not last week, it feels like last week when we last spoke. I know it was longer ago than that. You also brought up the issue of wanting to share around the GEPRA measures. And since the first two of the GEPRA measures are related to those capacity building activities for tribal education agencies, state education agencies, and very closely tied to the professional development, we'll take a look at those and really just open up the floor for some program sharing so that you all can hear from each other and ask each other questions and have some conversations around that. And then we want to spend a little bit of time today with the recently released National Indian Education Study. This is a study that is sponsored by the Office of Indian Education under their national activities umbrella. And so we did want to just lift that up and highlight a few things from that. And maybe you've already had a chance to look at it. And if that's the case, we can talk about some of the data that's in that report. So, and then as always, we'll close out by sharing dates and topics for upcoming technical assistance events. Okay, so I know we're just a teeny group here with us today. We've got a couple of folks who have joined us here in the last few minutes, but let's go ahead and maybe we can do this in a round robin style, and somebody could volunteer to get us started. But on the screen right now, I just have those descriptions of your GEPRA measures 1 and 2 that are most tightly coupled with that professional development. Really about that number of capacity building activities that are offered either by the tribal education agency or the state education agency. They could be related to, those capacity building activities could be trainings or technical assistance in areas related to tribal history or language. Really depends on your local needs and context. So to begin, I just have those two questions up on the screen. What is your program planning or implementing for capacity building or professional development activities? And did you establish any program measures for these activities? So I'll just open up the floor and you can take yourselves off of mute to kick us off with the sharing. Is there anybody who wants to get us started?
This is Allison from the Blue Lake Rancheria.
Hi, Allison.
What we've done, we have two different kinds of professional development we're offering. We're offering curriculum-specific professional development on like the history of the tribes in this area as it ties to our culturally adapted curriculum. So Save the California Salmon, we've worked with them to create curriculum on rivers for our science classes and on the salmon. And so training has been developed and has been offered to teachers that would like to use the curriculum in the classroom. Same goes with our technology curriculum. We have a Python coding class that uses Yurok basket designs in its coding. And so teachers are going to be receiving professional development on the coding that they'll be using in the classroom and on the Yurok history and of the tribal culture of weaving and what it means along with that. Additionally, we've approached the Humboldt County Office of Education and using sources from the National Indian Education Association, and hopefully we'll be providing a blanket training where the participants take place at last year's conference in Denver, not last year, wow, 2019's conference in Denver had the blanket exercise as a part of the conference. And we were so impressed by that and its impact that we reached out to NIEA. So we're hopefully going to be getting that set up by the end of this calendar year as a training available to all 31 districts in Humboldt County. And we'll be hosting that hopefully on the Blue Lake, at the Blue Lake Rancheria on our tribal area. But that's what we're doing right now with the capacity building activities under GEPRA 1.
Gotcha. And I feel like I've heard somebody describe the blanket exercise before, but I don't know if folks have questions about what that is, or if you want to say a couple words about what that is.
The ladies from the NIEA that led it, they take you through the history pre-colonization through current day. And you start out with blankets on the floor that you then stand on. So the group of people stand on the blankets. And as they take you through the history, they talk about the people who have passed because of the history, and you slowly see people leave the blankets and the blanket gets taken away. And so it's very visual when they walk up to you and say, you died of smallpox because this happened to you, and you have to step away, and they tell you what color card to use, and they call out those cards to say, everybody who's orange, you have to step away because you died of smallpox. Everybody that's green, you were in California at the time of colonization and this happened to you, and then you have to step away. And eventually you're left with only a few people left on a few blankets, and the room had once been filled with blankets and people. And so it's a very visual and participatory kind of activity that explains what has happened since pre-colonization to today and the impact on tribal peoples. I don't know how to summarize that. It's kind of emotional talking about it because it was really impactful.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I bet it was very, very impactful. Thank you for sharing that. And then have you thought about any program measures around those particular activities that you just described for your?
Yes, we're trying to do 2 TEA capacity building on the large scale, like the blanket exercise. We're trying to get 2 of those per year, and at a minimum 2 of the curriculum specific ones per year.
Well, thank you for jumping in to kick off our sharing, Allison. Anybody have questions for Allison or want to follow up? Can feel free to take yourselves off mute. We'll just keep it open for sharing. Hi, Laura.
I apologize. I arrived late. On the blanket exercise, was this something that the community was very actively involved with adapting it for your community, and how did the community receive it? Up here in Alaska, it has been mixed, and I'm one of the ones who are totally against the blanket exercise. So I'm just curious how your community came about accepting it.
We haven't done the blanket exercise yet. We're in the process of scheduling it with the local education agencies right now.
Thank you.
They have liked our curriculum specific ones though, the ones that we've done on the salmon and the rivers and the baskets. Those have gone well.
Well, and I saw
Yeah, some
Esther.
people really, really like it, and I'm glad, we all have different tools, but I'm firmly in the camp that's just totally against the blanket exercise, just personal preferences.
Yeah. Well, and I see that Esther says they've done it in her community as well. What was your experience with it?
I felt it was very powerful, and I think it's a good way to approach teaching trauma to especially new educators that don't know the history of the trauma that's been done, especially in Alaska. And so it gives it gives a different perspective other than reading about it, and it's that visual perception too. I've done it once, and I'm also a trainer in it. I just haven't had time, but I think they are trying to adopt it, I know, in the schools, but it is, you need to be mature and know about trauma. But I I felt it was very powerful, and it's something that I think everyone should know, because it is traumatic, and there's no way to it's just a powerful feeling that I think people that don't know anything about it should experience it, and then they'll see things differently, that we hope anyway.
Go
Well,
ahead.
and I'm curious because Laura, you bring up a good point that everybody's going to have a different interaction with that type of a workshop. Before you've done that, is there any type of pre-work or discussion that's had with participants so they have a little bit of an idea, because it is a powerful and intense workshop, so that participants do have a little bit of an idea what type of thing they're going to be participating in, and have some maybe choice to opt out if it's something that they don't feel comfortable with.
With the ones I've attended, they've had behavioral consultants.
Okay. Thank you.
I can tell you that when we are working on this plan right now to do it, we're taking our guidance from the previous GONAs we've had, Gathering of Native Americans, where we have a mental health provider there on site. So if someone has something they need to talk to someone about, or they're having any issues from trauma, that they can go to a safe space. So we're discussing that. That's one of the topics of what do we do for those people that may have adverse effects from the impact of the workshop at the moment. And that's one of the discussions of where we can have a separate space for them to go to feel like they can confront what they're feeling in a safe place. So yes, that is under consideration as we're putting the training together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That makes me think about sort of the next level of that, right? And some conversations I've had with other educators in the under the umbrella of American Indian education, and addressing topics and curriculum. And this is about capacity building. And one of the issues that has come up is support when teachers address sensitive topics, or in the classroom, giving them sort of that kind of a guidance or support to be able to do that. So I'm hearing this professional learning experience, and providing the supports around that, so that it's, you know, as safe a place as you can make it. And then I'm wondering too, and it's okay, I don't expect anybody's had an answer, but I'm just thinking about how that then, like, how that translates to how teachers can support students in the room too, when we're talking about those sensitive things. But good conversation. We could really go deep with that one, definitely. I also want to make sure others have time to share what they're doing around professional development and GEPRA measures 1 and 2 from other areas. Would anybody care to jump in? This is definitely your time. So feel free to share and speak to one another too. You don't necessarily have to go through me or Sarah or to ask a question if you have one.
I can tell you under GEPRA 2, we have established a minimum of 1 meeting a month with our LEAs. But on top of that, as a part of that, there's a parent advisory council that each of the LEAs has that we are working with. So our Northern Humboldt Union High School District, we meet with them on a monthly basis, a minimum, and we discuss things like policies. For example, here's a wonderful example of what we're doing right now. We have a pilot program for summer where people become a drone pilot, and we want them to be able to participate in our STEM curriculum on the Rancheria, especially the items around river and restoration work. So they're going to learn how to fly their drones, but we have to have policies in place about how drones can be used and the safe use of drones and how to file flight plans and all of that other stuff. So our students can have an actual 107, a Part 107 FAA license. And so I didn't know what to do. So I had to go out and work with our local education agencies on what policies, how to get policies drawn up, what kind of forms we need for student safety. I mean, those technical capacity building kind of things that if you're starting programs, you may not know you need. So a part of our program development that we're doing in the future is our Modern Youth Apprenticeship Academies under this grant, under the STEP grant. And we're developing the curriculum. And if the curriculum is these kids are going to learn how to fly drones, I've got to make sure that I have all the policies and structures in place for that. So that's one of the things our LEAs have been helping us do, is what technical stuff we have to have in place in order for us to run the programs that we're developing.
Thanks, Allison. Does anybody have questions for Allison? Or... How about some others sharing either of these professional development buckets here? Are there trainings offered by the tribal education agency, or the state education agency?
Are there any types of, trainings or capacity building activities, either that y'all plan to offer or that you plan to engage with your SEAs? Maybe something you have that'll be coming up in the fall. I know a lot of things were delayed, of course, with all the pandemic things, but maybe things that are going to be ramping up in your year 2 of your project.
Well, maybe, let's see here. I do have a couple other questions too. Maybe maybe we'll have some, oops, a little bit more sharing here, but in addition to things that you have either planned or are in the midst of planning or implementing, are there any challenges that you've experienced in these areas around capacity building or professional development, and what resources might be helpful? It's hard to say. I know sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So maybe if folks just want to share a little bit about what they're thinking or sort of grappling with at this point in your grant with these around these particular areas.
Well, I'm trying to move forward with planning because our first year is planning, and it's like I said, it's hard to I don't know what I don't know. So as we keep moving forward, I use the word apprenticeship, and then it was like, okay, that I know what that means. We know what that means. And then we meet with College of the Redwoods and we're discussing, modern youth apprenticeships, and they're like, apprenticeship means something completely different to us because there's these standards you have to meet in order to get apprenticeship hours that are confirmed by the labor board and blah, blah, blah. And they started going off and I'm like, wow, well, that's not what we meant. And so I'm learning that you don't know what you don't know. Are you here following me? So it's only through doing the work are we discovering that, okay, how do we redefine this? What, we're talking about capacity building activities right there. Okay, we need definitions. So we're all on the same page. So definitions of our work of scope, definitions of what does apprenticeships mean, definitions of who can be involved in them, what industry sectors can officially have apprenticeships. It's a lot of things like that under GEPRA 2 that we are learning just by doing the work. So I don't think we're setting quote unquote trainings up. We're working through things and they're providing technical assistance to us on an ongoing basis. It's not like we're having, we have a mandatory minimum in our contract that they have to see us twice a month. I put that in there on purpose. but we end up talking to them. I think Lisa talks to them practically daily, and we ask questions constantly. What does this mean? And what does that mean? And how do we incorporate this? And how do we meet both our tribal ordinances and our standards? Or how do we develop tribal ordinances and standards for our programs? And then lots of Google searches and trying to educate ourselves and watching videos and attending meetings. Oh my God, Lisa has been to so many meetings to discover so much that we needed to know. So like we're growing on GEPRA 2 because every time we ask a question, I said a mandatory minimum of twice a month. Well, they've exceeded the whole entire year in the last 2 months, versus the quota of meetings that we've had to have. So how going forward, I don't know. I can't really say because it keeps expanding. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't know how to set a goal for year 2 because we far exceeded year 1 and I can't even imagine where it could go because it's just, wow, my mind has been open to so many things we need to get done.
And I can attest to that as well. I'm joining in by phone because my microphone on the computer is not working, but I wanted to see whatever you put on the screen. So yeah, I can personally attest to what's being done. And yes, there may have been policies in place before, for example, but we're looking at them from a new, fresh perspective, to make sure that all the needs are being met. And that's really important. And we have, so many people and so many resources to use, and collaboration, make sure that it's coherent and understandable. But when Ali says that, we've done so much just in the planning stage, it's incredible.
Mm.
It's incredible. So thank you for letting me share.
Of course, thank you for sharing. I think that whole issue of defining terms and making sure that we're using the same term in the same way. It was something that I remember we talked about at the project directors meeting in one of the sessions that I helped to facilitate, when you're working with partners and stuff, because it can mean something totally different, depending on the context. And that goes both ways, right? From state to tribes and vice versa.
And I think also, as you're thinking about that learning process and you're uncovering so much information, whether it be things that you think about now or as you go through that process, and everyone else who's participating today, are there resources that we could be providing as your TA support that would be helpful? Whether that be helping you find resources or tools, providing you with opportunities to engage in training or workshops on certain areas. Think about those things also that we could do to help support you as you're going through that process.
Well, I've been asking the LEAs for those kinds of things because I didn't know what to ask you for if you
Yeah.
had that, like teacher recruitment. Okay. What is a teacher recruitment policy? What does that look like? What does a teacher recruitment plan look like? What are the basic components that need to be included in the plan? When we sit down and do, like, I can write a strategic plan for a business, I can write one for an agency, but when it comes to recruiting teachers, what that's very specific,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
a very specific thing. So is there a basic form we should follow? What are the key points we should consider when putting this in? Accessibility to the information and how they can participate in the teacher recruitment program. That's a requirement of GEPA. We have to do that anyway. So that I already knew. So I'm like, okay, it's got to be accessible. I got to do that. We have that policy in place. But what should be provided to what? I don't know. This is what I'm trying to say is I don't know what constitutes a well thought out, comprehensive teacher recruitment plan.
Yeah. No, and that's a great
question. I have ideas, but I have nothing to compare them to.
Right. Yeah. And it's hard when you're starting from scratch versus, even if it's not the world's best example, if there's something that you can take and then make your own and make better.
Is there a model program? Is there an example, a template? It should have these 4 key components. I mean, anything that can tell me if I'm headed in the right direction, because I think that I know, but I don't know what I don't know. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I could have invested all this time and effort, and then someone tells me, oh, but this means this.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Or did you even think about this other thing?
Yes. Is there something I'm leaving out? I don't know.
No, and that's definitely something I think we could look at and, really go more in depth with in our July get together.
Absolutely. My mind's already turning. How about some of our other programs on the call here? Any challenges or thoughts about resources that might be helpful, or just some sharing about what you're thinking about in planning, maybe? I want to make sure I give everyone a chance to share before I take us into the NIEA study.
Yeah, and remember, even if you think about things later, if it's next week and you're like, oh, if only they had a resource for this or help for this. You can reach out at any time and, let us know those things. And if it's not something that we just have readily available, like here, go ahead. It's things that we can research, or we can pull together what we think are, a set of great resources and get that ready at minimum for our next get together.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things to do is find lots of good stuff for people who need it. Okay, well, like Sarah said, if you have additional thoughts that occur to you later on about what might be helpful, we always want to hear from you. Or if something occurs to you in the course of our session here today, feel free to drop that into the chat boxes as well. Let's go ahead and spend a few minutes now of our time together here to take a look at this recently released study, the National Indian Education Study, and maybe by show of hands or by those little reaction buttons that are down at the bottom of your screen, you can give me a thumbs up or type into the chat box if you received notice of this study that came out, or if you've seen it and it got on your radar somehow. Just if you're familiar, I see there's one thumbs up. That's good to know. I didn't get the initial announcement myself, but definitely was one of the things that OIE wanted to make sure that we spent a little bit of time with. See, a couple of you did get that notice. So just a few quick facts about it before we actually spend some time in looking at some of this data. This study, it's done periodically, but it's not an annual thing. It's actually been conducted 5 times since the first report in 2005. It uses assessment data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is an assessment that's done nationwide. And it also includes some survey questions focused on American Indian, Alaska Native culture and language. And then so we can look at some of those survey responses and how they responded to those. So the report includes trend data about the achievement of American Indian students at grades 4 and 8 on that NAEP, on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, in reading and math. And as it's overall, it gives the trend data for overall, as well as for the 15 states that have relatively high populations of American Indian, Alaska Native students. So it does include some contextual factors associated with higher and lower performing schools with different proportions of American Indian, Alaska Native students. And it explores those findings related to cultural knowledge, interest in reading about cultures, whether it's their own or others, engagement at school, and perceptions about their own efforts in the school. Those survey results are reported on primarily the 4th and 8th grade students who selected to respond to the survey. That included about 7,000 4th graders and 6,300 8th graders that participated in the 2019 student surveys. Teachers and school administrators also completed surveys. The results are reported in 3 different categories, as well as in overall categories. And the 3 categories are low density public schools, and by low density, they mean that schools where there's less than 25% of all the students identified as American Indian or Alaska Native. And then it also reports on high density public schools, where there's more 25% or more of the student population are identified as American Indian Alaska Native schools. And then it has a separate category for BIE schools and a separate category for all that includes all American Indian Alaska Native students that were sampled, regardless of which kind of school they attend. So I guess our first question is, you know, of these different categories, which types do you serve? Do you have a sense of that? Can feel free to type in the chat box or come off mute. We're a small group, so sharing is easy to do verbally.
This is Allison from Blue Lake Rancheria.
Hi, Allison.
We serve a combination of low density and high density. High density on the Hupa Reservation and high density on the Yurok Reservation. Those schools receive services through our programs. And we also serve low density, which is primarily in the larger areas of our community, like Eureka, the city of Eureka, the city of Arcata, and McKinleyville, where they have low density schools. So a combination.
Thanks. I'm wondering if that's the same in some of our other grantees, or if they have a different constellation of schools. So let's take a look at some of the actual data here. I see that Sarah has popped into the chat box a couple of links. So if you don't already have a copy of this report, you can click on that link and open it up on your browser if you want to look at that on your own computer. But I'm going to put up on the screen just a series of excerpts from the report. This comes from page 30, and it is table number 17. And I'll just highlight a few things on the screen here, some particulars about the data, so you kind of know what you're looking at here. But first, you can see here are the categories, right? We have the low density schools, the high density schools, the BIE schools, and then this all American Indian Alaska Native students here. Over here in the upper left-hand corner of the table is the question that was asked here. So this comes from the survey. There's also, as I said, NAEP achievement data in there in the report that you can look at. But this one is looking at the question, it's reporting on the question, during the last 2 years, how many times have you attended professional or community-based development programs, such as in-service classrooms and workshops, including online classes, aimed at developing culturally specific instructional practices for American Indian Alaska Native students? And then you can see these are the responses of teachers of these student groups. So teachers of grade 4 in low density, high density BIE schools, teachers of grade 8, low density, high density BIE schools. And you'll notice that there's a few superscript letters here. And what those denote are that these teeny tiny little A's and B's are noting some significant differences when comparing these two different groups. So in this column right here under high density school, we see that 42% of teachers in high density schools reported never receiving those types of professional learning experiences. And what that little A notes is that this is statistically significant. This is a statistically significant difference when compared with responses from low density public schools. And then you see in this BIE column here there's an A and a B. So this is saying that there is a statistically significant difference between this response and both low density school responses and high density school responses. So we notice that there's statistical significance here when compared with all of this column, as well as down here. When we get down to grade 8, responses to 3 or 4 times or 4 times or more, there is not a superscript there, or a little a, denoting that there's not a statistically significant difference between those responses there. I hope that made sense. So just, does anything jump out to you on this slide? Is there anything that surprises you, or maybe confirms something, a sense that you already had yourself?
And I think this definitely relates back to some of the information we were talking about with your GEPRA, and that there's definitely a lack of professional development opportunities for a lot of the educators in all levels of schools, by the types that they're breaking them down by in this report. I don't know if that's something that you're seeing locally as well. Sometimes, when it's conglomerated like this nationwide, it can look a little different than what you experience locally, but it definitely seems to highlight that there is a significant need for increased professional development.
I know here in Alaska, travel has always been a big issue, like in many rural areas, but because of the pandemic and everyone's increased efforts to make things more virtual and available online, we have seen more opportunities available, especially to educators in rural areas that maybe they didn't have before because travel was so expensive, or they finally got the green light to attend a training and then they got weathered in. So the availability of increased virtual trainings and workshops has actually really helped our state.
Good, that's good. Okay, yeah, this definitely reports on national trends, right? And the data that represents, and it may look a little different depending on what's happening locally in your particular area. Let's take a little bit of time here. We'll pull another one up here. This is from page 13 of that report. And in this table, we're looking at the percentage distribution of students who reported learning about American Indian or Alaska Native history and traditions according to those school types and densities. So the question was, who taught you most of what you know about American Indian and Alaska Native history? The response options were, no one has taught me, or family members, friends, teachers, tribal representatives, elders, or someone else. And then we also see there's just a couple of scripts here. So noting that this 16% over here who said no one has taught me, in BIE schools, is a statistically significant difference than this number over here in low density schools, where 12% of students answered no one has taught me about American Indian, Alaska Native history. You see a couple more here. The B refers to a comparison with high density schools, which is interesting because it's the same number over here, but maybe that's a rounding thing. Anything, what stands out to you here? What is, as you look at this table and you mull it over, is there anything here that stands out to you? What is this data saying to you?
Well, this is Allison from the Blue Lake Rancheria. The data is saying to me that teachers aren't teaching students about American Indian, Alaska Native history and traditions. Or there not enough of them are.
Yeah, so looking at these numbers here, I see that teachers are slightly higher than, say some of the other numbers, but the family member numbers are higher than teachers. Percentage of students who report that family members have taught them about the history versus teachers.
Well, what I'm saying is that it shows that there's a lack of that in schools,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not good. Is what I would interpret that as. So.
Fair, totally fair. Any other noticings here? I know when we were kind of looking at the report and deciding which of the tables we wanted to lift up for you here today, we were commenting about, there's I know there's a couple of notes about some statistically significant differences, but the numbers are really close too across the board, regardless of what type of school. This answers seem to be kind of in a pretty close range, around the same. Which probably further emphasizes your point, Allison. And I see Olani made a note there too in the chat box about the importance of engaging family members, that a lot of the history and culture resides with our families still, and it's so important to engage our communities members. All right, I think we got time for maybe one or two more here. This is table number 6. It appears on page 17 of the report. And in this table, we're looking at the question, how often, this is teachers reporting on this answer, reporting on how often they integrate materials about American Indian, Alaska Native culture or history into reading and language arts lessons. And let's see. Oh, and there's a couple of hashtag marks on here too. So what that indicates in the tables in the report is that that number rounds to 0. So we see here in looking at the schools with a low density population of American Indian, Alaska Native students, they're effectively, 0 or close to 0 of those teachers report incorporating those materials and culture, language, culture and history into language arts once a week or almost every day. Those are 0.
Well, I think it's interesting because this is a teacher report and your last slide was a student report. And I see significantly more of the teachers are saying, I'm incorporating the culture and the history into my lessons, much more so than the kids are reporting that they're getting the culture and history from their school teachers.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and it may possibly also have to do with, what's considered integration. So, a mere mention, are you considering that you're integrating it, that there was a mere mention in a book or an article that you were including in your language arts lesson, whereas a student might not see that as significant and wouldn't consider that really learning about history and culture, but you would consider it as I've integrated, it was mentioned, or it had just a small portion in there. And so, that's also something to think about is, this is student self-reporting, teacher self-reporting, and there's not a lot of parameters around what counts as certain things. But I do think it's interesting that the teachers are reporting such higher levels than the kids.
I'm noticing too here in the BIE column, right? We have all of these notations about it being notably different or statistically significant in the difference of what's happening here in our public schools of the high and low density populations. So let's see. 25% of teachers report at least once a week at BIE schools versus 4 and 13%. 11% report every day versus 1 and 6%.
I'm wondering too, like when I look, like you were saying, Sarah, back at the student response and the teacher response, when you're learning in culture in your family, there's probably way more hands-on and interactive, and you're actually in something or you're doing something. Whereas maybe in a school setting, you're less interactive, less hands-on, and it's more about talking about it um, or reading about it, or just the level of integration. I think that might be a factor too.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I'm wondering from the folks here on our call today if this how this information might be useful or helpful for you in your work. All right, we've got just a couple of more minutes here before the top of the hour. So maybe this one is about math, but we do have, so this is a similar question that we asked on the previous screen, but how often teachers integrate materials about American Indian, Alaska Native culture history into mathematics lessons. You might notice a similar trend, or maybe a slightly different trend. There seems to be more responses, higher percentages at these lower ends, never or once a year when it comes to mathematics versus language arts programs, which is kind of interesting. And we got one more here. This is a slightly different format here. So and this table, this excerpt is from page 21 of the report. And in this table, we're looking at responses to the question answered by school administrators in their schools about receiving instruction, about students receiving instruction about American Indian, Alaska Native culture. So do students in your school receive instruction about American Indian, Alaska Native cultures in any of these areas? And then they break it down for each grade level and these certain topic areas. So history of tribes or cultural groups, village or tribal government, and then current events and issues important to tribes or other cultural groups there. I'll point out, this is again like the other questions too, is a self-report. So it doesn't necessarily take into account, the frequency, the quality of what's being delivered. It's really just a yes or no indicator. Are these topics addressed? So this is what administrators are reporting about what topics are covered in their schools. Noticing.
Hi. This is Allison. I was going to
ma'am.
jump in and say, yes, I can totally agree with this information, and it resonates with me because in my discussions with the LEAs, as we were discussing capacity building for GEPRA 1 and what we could provide, we also were discussing the curriculum that we've been developing and adapting this last 3 years with the NYCP grant. And what I found was that they tend to think of tribes as historical things and not living current cultures. And so when you look at the tribal or village government or tribal, current events, that totally rings true. And so we focused a lot on, yes, the historical nature of the culture, but that the culture is alive and vibrant now, and that there is a government that is enacting laws and doing programs and things now. And so, especially in incorporating it into our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade curriculum, that starts bringing in the civics classes and courses and concepts that start in 8th grade and then move on into the 9th grade and on. And so we were very STEAM and STEM oriented to begin with, but when this kind of conversation came up and what they were or weren't learning, we kind of shifted and said, wow, we really need to focus more on what tribes are doing right now with regards to current events. And so in particular, our tribal government is focusing on energy resources, the river, the salmon, especially in Northern California. I don't know if you are understanding of what's happening up here with the drought and the fact that we're not going to have any salmon this year. It's just the river is so warm and the water has been so warm that we have a thing called ick, and it's killed off the salmon. And so that is something that's happening right now. And we are working with Save the California Salmon, and we had steelhead in the classroom this year. And so fish, rivers, water, and what's literally happening right now has been at the forefront of what we've been doing. And teachers are a little uncomfortable because of the subject matter and how serious the nature is. But I can totally attest that this is the case, and that the standard curriculum used in public schools doesn't address it. And ethnic studies courses might come close, but that's not even an approved thing yet in California. So if anything, I think that our coming discussions will be more on the current events and what the tribes are doing when it comes to capacity building under GEPRA 1, to go back to what we were talking about before. But that's how we're going to use this information, because it totally supports what I've been arguing with the superintendents over.
Yeah, I think that's a really great connection, kind of tying all this together for us, Allison. I see the comments too. This data can be helpful in applying new grants, and to your point too, even in advocating for some things to happen in your context too. As a former high school, as a former social studies teacher, this village and tribal governments, these no responses really kind of worry me. That definitely jumped out too. So maybe this is something that can help drive your point home with some of the folks you're advocating with and for.
Well, that and the fact, Humboldt County, we have 9 tribes in our county, and people cross through tribal lands all the time and don't realize they're on tribal lands, or that there's issues that if they commit crimes on, like our Blue Lake Rancheria, our people are cross deputized with the California, and so we can arrest people for breaking California law on our rancheria. That's a thing. We've been cross deputized. So our county, our sheriff's department, they're cross deputized. So people think they can come on the rancheria and do whatever they want. Ha 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 ha. No. And so it would be helpful for people to learn in school that tribes have police departments and laws, and we have a tribal court and all of that, and all of the tribes up here do. So yeah, I'm trying and talk about this to our superintendents. It's like, you tell people that there's a police department and you follow the law of the city of Arcata. Well, the same thing goes for the Blue Lake Rancheria. We're a Native American sovereign government. We have laws, and when you come on our land, you're going to obey them. So knowing that it's not just this figurative thing is something that we need to discuss.
Absolutely. I know we're right at that. We're actually a couple minutes past our designated time together. So I'll take us through the last few slides here. And I know we have an impulse session that we hope that if you have a minute or two to stick around and answer those, that you will, and maybe just think about, how else you could use the data in this report that came out. Our next talking circle session will be on the 14th. We also have a logic models and data-driven decision-making series happening. We had our first session yesterday, and we'll be convening on Tuesday, June 15th, and then again on Tuesday, June 22nd, to um, talk about logic models and data-driven decision-making. I think some of you were on that call. And of course, our office hours at the end of the month, you're always free to drop those in. So thanks, Sarah, for popping up that poll. Just a few questions there. This is the only survey/poll that we're going to ask for your input in. So if you could take a minute to answer that while we keep it open, and just that's one of the questions on there. I'll put up the contact information, of course. If you need to get a hold of your program officer, Mrs. Donna Sabis Burns, you've got her email up there, or Shala Ortega. She's got her email there as well. Always a friendly reminder, please include your grantee name and PR number when you're emailing OIE, so they can make sure that you get a timely response. And I see we've got 3 of our 4 attendees responding to our poll. So thank you so much for that feedback and input, and staying for 3 extra minutes. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I do have to go because I have another meeting, but I left in the chat a local article from the North Coast Journal about the Karuk tribe and how they declared a state of emergency. It's a worthwhile read, so please share it to whom you might think it would be beneficial.
I will. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.